Welcome back, everybody. This is Brian and Brian for Breaking Down Security, episode 11. This week is a part one of our interview with Phil Beyer, who gave a great talk about leadership at B-Sides Austin. Mr. Betcher got to go to that, and I unfortunately did not, but Mr. Betcher recorded it for us and posted it on our website.
Yep, with permission, of course.
With permission, that's right. Maybe you could talk about some of the stuff that he had talked about there.
Yeah, well, I remember the speech, took notes or whatever, and kind of came up with some questions for him, and we decided to have him on our podcast, talk about leadership. Anybody in the organization can be a leader. You can be a leader if you're on the very bottom rung of the management chain, right?
Yep.
You can lead from behind. That's kind of what I've always believed that. If your manager gives you a task or whatever, you can lead with that task. So,
that's right.
And influence others. So, and the important thing is that, and Phil emphasizes this, start right now. There's no reason you can, I need to read some reference material on being a better leader or whatever. No, start today.
Make mistakes, take a little risk. Leadership isn't without its risks. And he's quick to delineate the difference between leadership and management, which you'll hear in our interview when today. We're going to do part one now, and we'll do part two next week like we did with our other podcast interviews. So,
yeah, and he gives great references, and we encourage you in like I said, all facets in IT or whatever job you have, check out some of the references he's got. They're great. I have myself, and it's helped me just this past week.
So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get right into the interview with Mr. Phil Beyer. Okay, this is Brian and Brian with Breaking Down Security. We're here with Phil Beyer, who is the Director of Information Technology? Information security. I didn't mean to short sell you there. We're talking with him about his talk at B-Sides Austin about leadership, and not just leadership in information security per se, but leadership more of how to be a better leader or how to inspire others. Welcome, Phil, to Breaking Down Security.
Thanks, guys. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah.
Hey, Phil, let's talk about what you said, the term lead in place. What does that mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think a key aspect of leadership is in knowing that it's not something that you can necessarily schedule or have to do in the far future. It's something you can begin doing now. So lead in place, and what we're really talking about there is this is something that you can be doing today in your role now. It has nothing to do with your job title. It has nothing to do with your management responsibilities. It has nothing necessarily to do even with the organizational groups you're a part of. It has everything to do with your attitude and your approach to service, right? So serving other people is the primary drive and goal of leadership. And if you're in it to serve yourself and gain, then you've got the wrong attitude, and you're going, in my opinion, you're going to fail, and I think history proves that. If you're in it to work with other people, to serve other people, to help them and guide them, then I think you can lead wherever you are. So that's the idea of lead in place.
So if you decide you want to be a leader, start today.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. So part of what I tried to put forth in the talk, and part of what I try to evangelize with folks whenever I get a chance to talk to them about leadership and about getting involved, really, is kind of the usual way I broach the subject. Leadership tends to be something that people are intimidated by. I think inappropriately, but I think many people are intimidated by the concept of leadership. So often what I'll involve people or try to involve folks in doing is in jumping in, starting today, and doing a little bit here and there to work for on behalf of others.
How do you start jumping in? I mean, Infosec in particular. I mean,
Okay, yeah, right.
Let's relate it to that.
Sure. So we have a very apropos example right in front of us. You guys are leading. I think in a way you have decided that it's important to you to educate, to reach out, and to involve the community, and you're doing a good job of that. I think other people, the kind of aspect of leadership that's critical right away is to claim responsibility. Again, in your example, you've claimed responsibility to further the cause of information security in terms of education. Others of us, our goal is to further the cause of information security in working with people, even in our organization, right? So security in general is about change. The vast majority of situations are not secure to begin with.
Yeah.
I suppose there are some situations that are, but many of us are in a role, or most of us are in a role where our goal is to enact change or to affect change. And that is a slow process. Anytime we engage in that process in a rapid way, we fail quickly, and we likely either get fired or relegated to a position that is no longer looked to for guidance. So if we want to succeed in our change agent goal, we really work towards that change on a gradual and slow basis. We build influence, we build partners and rapport, exactly,
Yeah.
And we try to involve others and include others rather than push them away or prevent them or belittle them or demean them.
It's much harder to convince everybody that this is the right direction to go. I mean, how do you get people to do the right thing in your mind when maybe, let's say in a corporate environment, they're just there to earn a paycheck? That's tough.
That I think that's a great example, because I think that's the most difficult situation to work with, right? The apathy example versus the hardcore, adamant person who's opposed to you. I would much rather take the passionate person who's livid with me about trying to do something different than these quote unquote secure way, whatever that way might be, versus the apathetic individual. So the apathetic individual who is just clocking in for that paycheck, those folks are much more difficult to deal with, because trying to identify where they're motivated and what their goals are is hard for me. And we didn't really start with it, but I like to start with the fact that I am not an expert on this subject, by the way. I am a student of leadership. I'm an enthusiast of leadership, and I'm very enthusiastic about becoming a better leader, but it's not something that I consider myself to be an expert in. So I'm glad to have this conversation with you guys, because it helps me to continue to flesh out for myself what I think leadership is about, what I've observed and heard from others as to what leadership is about, and then getting y'all's perspective on what you think leadership is about. Again, that apathetic situation is hard, because we don't really know what that person is trying to do, if they're going towards. Whereas the person sitting across from us at the table who adamantly is opposed to what we're trying to do, it's clear. We know what they're trying to, what their motivations are. So
Sure.
My intention as a leader is not to manipulate others, but it's certainly to understand them. To understand where they're coming from and understand how they want to communicate with me so that I can communicate with them better.
Right, and you mentioned the one-on-one conversation. If somebody is opposed to you, it's better to talk to them one-on-one and get where they're coming from as opposed to a group environment.
Very astute observation. So oftentimes in management, which is just an aspect of leadership, I suppose, depending on your perspective, oftentimes as a manager, we're advised when we have feedback, especially negative feedback, to give our fellow employees or our direct reports, to pull those people aside and not to do that in a group scenario, right? That again can demean, it can reduce, it can belittle someone. And so when, in a peer situation or even a superior situation, right, where somebody is higher up in the organization than you are, there's still leadership potential there. There's still an opportunity to engage that person, again, face-to-face, one-on-one, preferably not over the phone, but if necessary, via video interview or something like that, so that facial expressions and context is there. But identifying that way to connect with that person, and one technique that's often put forth with this kind of idea is not necessarily to lower yourself or belittle yourself, but identify with this person that you can and do need their help. So at making a request, it can oftentimes, a key example is Benjamin Franklin was a politician of some rapport, some import in our country's history, and he worked with a number of legislators and some who were adamantly opposed to him. In one example, he engaged a legislator who was known to be a literary kind of
aficionado.
Exactly,
yeah. Okay.
And asked for a rare book that person had in their library. To again, they can't
find
think
a
of the word
common
here.
ground.
There you go.
You got to find a
Exactly.
common ground.
Exactly. Find a way to connect with this person directly. Alongside, it had nothing to do with the opposition that they had in
or even the subject matter,
legal
yeah.
matters or the subject matter at all. But it had everything to do with making a personal connection with this person.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, that's a good strategy.
So in your talk, you were mentioning about how leaders should lead in the front, which is important because they're going to take those hits and they're going to make, they're going to be the effective filter against what's coming down the pipe, maybe from senior management or whatever. But you also talked about how leaders should eat last.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain a little bit about that concept?
Yeah, sure. So there's two interesting little sound bites, I suppose, about leadership that speak to it in more depth, but can be treated as on the surface as just kind of fun phrases. I think there's a lot to them, though. So leaders go first. We're in the front. We take the hits. We also I think the key aspect, though, and this is the title of a book that I've been reading or just finished by Simon Sinek called "Leaders Eat Last." The concept there, of course, is the example that he begins with, he leads with in the book, is the Marine Corps. And so the Marine Corps, with no written rule about this, but the Marine Corps, and I am not I'm not a veteran. I don't have military service, but I appreciate our armed forces very much. Thank you to everyone who has served. But the Marine Corps, kind of by practice, officers always stand at the end of the line when it's time to eat. The officers wait for their troops to eat first, and the officers eat last. And the concept there is that if we are not supporting and serving the folks who we are depending on to get the job done, because again, I think it's not a requirement of leadership, but I think a major aspect of leadership is that for the most part, leaders aren't really doing most of the work. Maybe leaders are doing some of the work. But if there's 100 things to do, we may do 1 or 5 or 10 of them, but not 90% of the work. And so the folks who are actually on the ground doing the work need to be supported. And they need to be supported in terms of they need to be given credit when when the work is successful, and the leader needs to be in front to take the blame when something goes wrong. So it's oftentimes reversed, right? A poor leader will shift the blame to their team, and will accept the credit when something goes right. And a good leader, a strong leader, will do the reverse. And a strong leader will go first and take the blame when something's wrong, and will put the team forward to give the team credit when you succeed.
Do you think that the problem that we see with the finger pointing and the blaming the team instead of, do you think that's because that maybe people weren't brought up with good leadership to begin with, and it kind of begats, the poor leadership begats poor leadership further, or could that be bolstered from an organizational standard to help teach, have people come in to teach new managers? Because there are just maybe some people who aren't meant to be leaders, and they're meant to be. There are followers. There are leaders.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question. Here's how I would answer it. I would say that the aspect that we're talking about there is self-defense or protection, right? So most often blame shifting happens when folks feel like they need to defend their paycheck. Right, so if I accept blame, then that's going to be a mark on my record, so that's why I'll get fired. Right? I mean, there's no protection in that organization for whether it's political or any other kind of structural way of defending folks for making mistakes or failure. Right? So I think there isn't. So to answer your question, Brian, there is an organizational failure there because the organization needs to support its managers and its leaders in terms of you and your team are allowed to make mistakes in terms of owning up to it and let's move forward with an action plan for fixing things. And there's also that personal accountability aspect where as a leader we must learn to accept responsibility for our decisions and step forward and again take blame where that's necessary. And enable our team to move forward by protecting them, right? So the other another kind of example here is animals who are defending themselves if they stand back to back against the predator. I don't remember. There's an example in a book that I was reading, and I don't remember if it's elephants or another kind of animal. But the idea is that when they feel safe and they trust each other and they stand back to back, they can defend themselves against a predator.
And they defend their young too by getting in a circle. I think
precisely.
Elephants and cattle also.
There you go.
Yeah.
There you go. When they are out on their own, that's when the predator can pounce. That's when the predator has no difficulty attacking and winning when they're solo. So if we can defend each other, if we can really stand as a team and stand back to back, then that positions us well for defense. And then in that security, we can continue to serve and serve well.
All right. And you mentioned be healthy or have a healthy system. I mean, how does that? I mean, what does that factor? How does that factor in?
Yeah, absolutely. So in being better leaders, we need to grow ourselves. And many of us, especially in security, our technology and the world changes so rapidly that we are in the habit of learning. We're in the habit of learning rapidly and quickly and being up on the latest of what's going on. We listen to podcasts like Breaking Down Security. I think the way, though, in which we take that to an extreme and we pursue it in an unhealthy way is we go too far and we think that that constantly gaining and gathering and absorbing new knowledge is the only way for us to survive, and we never really slow down and strategically decide what is the next thing to do. So from a productivity standpoint, if we run and we never really stop and think and plan where we need to go next, we can be unhealthy in our habits. And so that kind of health in terms of being a productive individual means that we slow down, means that we assess where we are, what our priorities are, and we don't bite off too much. Again, I think we're good at learning just by the nature of our profession, but we can take that too far in terms of being unhealthy in our productivity.
Sort of like chasing the next greatest thing without thinking too much about it or making sure that it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely. So here's a different example in our profession. That's a good example. A different example in our profession might be our kind of habit to just pursue the trend and buy the shiny tool, right? So for those of us who have budget, for those of us who have a team, oftentimes we find ourselves moving, even especially in a smaller program like mine now, and the programs I've led historically so far as security programs are relatively small, right? I'm not a part of a 100-man team. I'm a part of a 5-man team kind of idea, right? So we have a tendency to move from one strategic goal to the next without really establishing a solid process and repeatable, healthy approach to doing things. We're often required either by our business, by the auditor, or by that trend we see on the horizon. The bad guys are now using this thing, so we must shift rapidly and defend. And that's fantastic and that's great. But if we don't make strategic decisions about what is healthy and what's not for our teams, then we get disjointed and spread out, and we end up not defending anything.
How do you get out of that fighting fires mode? Or do you ever get out?
Yeah. So I'll let you know when I figure it out. Or maybe if somebody only listening has figured it out, can share it with the rest of us. So here's my perspective on that. I think that that teams and leaders must have regular touch points to take a step back and be strategic. So I have in the past had to force my teams to be strategic about what are we going to pursue and what are we not going to do. So I've done things like consolidate tools, right? So we've eliminated tools in the past that we have that we had budget for and we bought. I mean, these are things that we own, and it feels weird as a professional to own a tool and not dedicate some sort of time to it, right? We have decided to consolidate and pull back in the past based on some strategic decisions. We've decided to focus more on the kinds of efforts that build up our entire team, so not just our security team, but build up our IT team, build up the capabilities of our application development teams. Those efforts, while in say the SANS Top 20 or even in the auditors list, they may not be at the top of the list, but they empower our teams around us. They make us more reliable teammates in our organizations, and they de facto make us leaders. They make us people that others want to come to for guidance, because generally what we're spending our time on are things that are giving our other teams, our peers, support. And so when they are looking for additional guidance in terms of what should I work on or how do I fix this, they come to us first rather than trying to do it on their own or just burying it under the rug, sweeping it under the rug and leaving it alone.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Taking a snapshot of what all you have and then taking a step back, looking at everything and just assessing each tool, for example, whether or not you need it.
But to answer your question, because I didn't really answer it, I don't think that it is easy to get away from firefighting in Infosec. I do try to segregate my teams and segregate responsibilities so that everyone is not in firefighting mode all the time. But by nature of our business, we are firefighters.
You mentioned healthy and fit, thinking, and you have a pretty, not only just for the mind and learning your skills, but you do a lot of physical activity as well. Do you find that helps with the stress of doing work, and do you maybe do it during the work day to kind of break up the day so it's not always monotonous?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. So I begin every work day, actually I begin every day with a run, because that's the way that I focus. That's the way that I wake up. That's the way that I get started. That's the way that I kickstart my mind to literally race in terms of getting started for the day. So I know that many people like to take that break around lunchtime, either before or after, for the walk or the ride or something, when you have that privilege. I know that plenty of people end their day with activity. For me, what works best is beginning in the morning when it's quiet, when my mind can run and think. And so oftentimes I'll come up with ideas that, and again, in a healthy manner, I have to be careful, because so I document those ideas and I decide very quickly at the start of my workday if those are things that I should be working on today, or if that's just something I need to add to the dream list of something we need to be working on soon. But yeah, I begin with a run, and I recommend it to. I recommend early starts, I guess. That's the way that I like to talk about it. I realize that everybody in the world is not a runner, and you can't all be perfect. That's okay. But no, I think that early starts are a great way to, especially for us in who are firefighters often. We can get an early start and we can plan a day out, and we can identify what those top two or three most important tasks are that we can try to get accomplished first, so that we have a productive day, a day that feels healthy. Even if we end up firefighting for the rest of it, we know that those key tasks were accomplished. And I'm not talking about hour-long tasks. I'm talking about things that can be bite-sized chunks, even 5 or 15-minute type tasks that really help us feel healthy and productive for the day.
You start a new list every day, or?
So I've never really found that to be a good practice for myself. I know plenty of people who do, and they are successful at it. I keep a running list of things that I do that I shift and move around in terms of priorities. We all know that priorities shift on a regular basis. But yeah, for me, I like to have running lists of things that keeps my mind a little bit calmer.
Did you find that the physical activity helps with discipline to staying on task? Or you mentioned in your talk that you are a long-time practitioner of Aikido. Mm-hmm. Did you find that helped you with focus and discipline of your mind?
That's an interesting question. I haven't really thought of it that way. I've been doing martial arts for so long that I wonder if it is kind of affecting my approach to work and life and business without me really realizing it now. So that would be a good self-analysis question for me to be asking on a regular basis going forward, because I don't have the answer. I'm not really sure. I know that that based on my experience in the martial arts, it bleeds over into things I'm doing all the time, and I realize it after the fact, either in a conversation with my wife in the evening or with friends or something. I realize, hey, wow, this is very similar to how we might deal with something in the dojo. But no, I think just kind of on a day-to-day or task by task or situation by situation, I don't really realize whether that's an influence or not at the time.
You said a leader is someone who is responsible, right? The one who takes responsibility. But let's say you're my manager, and I'll give you an analogy. I cast the bullet, I clean the gun, I load the bullet into the gun, I hand the gun to you, and I point the gun at the target. You pull the trigger. Who's the leader in that situation?
Wow, that's an interesting situation or thought experiment. I
mean, because I would argue that I'm the leader because I pointed you in the right direction.
Sure.
I made everything available to you. You're probably the ultimate one who takes responsibility, right? Because you're the one who pulled the trigger. But did you really do anything?
So assuming in this thought experiment that our bullet is aimed at something that might lose its life, I would think that legally the only person with responsibility is the one who pulls the trigger. Though in a court of law, I'm no expert. So you may be an accomplice.
But apply that to Infosec.
Absolutely. So there's that classic phrase whose originator I can't think of right now, but in Infosec in particular, if you have all the responsibility, so to speak, but no authority to make any change, then you're not really in charge, right? Then you're not really the leader. And we find that situation in information security all the time. So I think that our charge and what's most important in our profession is to remember that risk ultimately does not reside with us, that risk is a business decision. Our goal is to identify it, point it out, guide, align, any number of other different key phrases you could throw in here. But ultimately what we're trying to do is shine a light on what could be something that a business needs to consider, or something that a business should be considering. But then, ultimately, we have to ensure that that someone else is, quote unquote, pulling the trigger. Because if we're the ones pulling the trigger, there's a fallacy, lined up there, right? So we think we might be in control or taking that ultimate responsibility for the business, when in fact, it doesn't belong to us to begin with. So that's a situation in which we are setting ourselves up for either reprimand or termination, rightfully so, if we're making a decision that doesn't belong to us. So I think, and the way this I think bleeds into the kind of leadership in general, or kind of blends into the leadership concept is. There can be leaders in multiple levels of organizations. So in your situation, I might turn it on its head and say that both of those folks have the opportunity to be a leader, right? Both the person who's lining things up and saying, hey, here's why we're aiming in this direction to account for these situations in the on the battlefield. We're going this direction instead of another, and here's the reasoning. But here's another situation that we might consider, or you should also talk to your other experts on your team, and let's make a decision together to determine ultimately what the business is responsible for. So I think there are leaders at all levels of organizations, not just an ultimate business leader. So.
Sure. You had a guy at your talk stand up and say, I'm doing these other projects on the side. I'm a leader. And in those, I can see that. But in the corporate environment, I really don't have any say. I can't lead. But to that I say, you can lead at all levels. You just need to, like you said, start today.
Mm-hmm. And influence is a key word there, right? So again, in your example, which is an interesting one, I would argue that the person lining the firearm up is a significant influencer, right?
Sure.
Because unless the person pulling the trigger makes a change,
Right.
The gun is going to fire in the direction that it was lined up towards. Maybe not perfectly, but certainly in that same direction. So an influencer is as much a leader as any other. And so especially in security, again, since we are agents of change and we are driving change in our organizations, or at least trying to drive change, we are leaders as influencers, not leaders as directors. Like, Brian, go do this, and other Brian, go do that. We are, hey, Brian, I really recommend that this is the direction we go because of these reasons and these risks. We can either choose to accept this risk and not go this direction, or we can go this direction and choose to mitigate it.
So you mentioned the risk. One of the things you said, the bad question in your talk was, how do I become a leader and not have any risk? Or I believe I said that correctly.
Risk-free, yeah. What's the risk-free way to insinuate? This is a Seth Godin quote from the book Tribes, which I highly recommend, which is all about leadership, as a matter of fact. What is the risk-free way to insinuate myself into the system to affect change? And so, that is the exact wrong question, because that is not a way to leadership. That's a way to become someone who thinks they have responsibility, become someone who thinks that they can affect change, and in fact, ultimately makes no difference in the world whatsoever. I think if we want to change the world, which is really what we're all about anyway, we may be changing our organizations, but our whole goal in our profession is to make the world a more secure place. I mean, that's really what we're about. So, at least the vast majority of people in our profession, I find very few people who've been in information security for an extended period of time are there to just clock in and get the paycheck. There's certainly plenty of us who have been beaten down so much by our roles or in our jobs that it feels like we're clocking in. But I think the folks who really stay in security and who stay engaged and involved are really interested in changing the world. They're not about making that quick buck. They're not about making the sale. They're about changing their organization and ultimately changing the world. And so if that's what we're about, then we really do need to look at it with a long view, and we need to look at it in terms of pursuing leadership on a regular basis and taking responsibility and moving forward. So, and none of that is risk-free. I mean, all of that necessitates an acceptance on our part that we could be fired as a result, that we could be denigrated or made fun of, that we could be criticized. But ultimately, if we are about great work, there is no great work in the world that is not that doesn't draw criticism. Okay, so we're going to be criticized. If you want to do great work, we're going to be criticized.
Right. How do you sharpen your saw?
Yeah, so Stephen Covey, right? So 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. The 7th habit is sharpen the saw, and that really. So I do a few things, and I'm going to get extremely pragmatic with you guys. So in the talk, I was a little general about that kind of area, and I referred to it earlier in our conversation that Infosec people are generally very good learners, right? So for me, podcasts are the way that I draw stuff in to my brain to get thoughts moving around and stimulate thinking. I listen to security podcasts, a lot of them. In addition to y'all's, I listen to leadership podcasts. I listen to marketing podcasts. I listen to just general tech podcasts to be aware of what's going on in the technology world. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I certainly listen to spiritual podcasts because that's part of what I'm about as well. I listen to, kind of off the top of my head here, what are some of the critical ones? Good storytelling podcasts. So that kind of all across the map. But storytelling podcasts are interesting in terms of learning how others communicate ideas and seeing how I can adopt some of that. So one thing that and the same thing goes for blogs that I read and email lists I subscribe to and things like that. But these days, the majority of the way, since I'm an Audible learner, the majority of the way that I take stuff in is in Audible format or audio format. And so I listen to books when I'm running. I don't really listen to podcasts when I'm running because I find that the rhythm just doesn't work. But I listen to podcasts throughout the day. I tell my coworkers oftentimes who are listening to music or others, if you see me walking around with a headset in, I'm listening to a podcast. So I think that there are, and for some of us who may be a little bit more distractible, I've got to be careful about when I do that, because I can't be doing work that's requiring deep thought. I have to be doing work that's a little bit more rote in what is to be done. But for the most part, I'm always taking things in from people that's timely and actionable, that's new, that's creative, that's stimulating for me, because that's when I find that I have the most interesting and creative ideas to bring back to the security profession.
So I'm going to check out manager-tools.com.
You should. Wow. Yeah. So
so
shout out to Martin Fisher, Southern Fried Security Podcast, Armor Guy on Twitter. Martin, a while back at the end of the December episode, like the last episode of 2013 for Southern Fried Security, did an interview with Mark Horstman, who is one of the contributors or founders of Manager Tools. And that was such an impressive interview. I enjoyed it so much. It was generally about leadership and security, so I highly recommend that episode. It's worth taking a look at. But as a result of that, I started listening to Mark Horstman and Mike Alzine on Manager Tools, and I have been blown away, because every single podcast from those guys is pragmatic and practical. It's got tips, it's got straightforward activities. They're on the order of 30-ish minutes or so, or shorter in a lot of cases. And you can find out everything from how to do better documentation of your, specifically for managers, right? I suppose it's kind of obvious, Manager Tools, but specifically for managers, how you do better documentation on your employees, how to give great feedback, how to do one-on-ones, how to coach, and then all the way down to how to give a better handshake. Which is just eminently practical, right? So how to introduce other people. I mean, there are techniques to these kinds of things. And so that's another great example of something that I try to take in and learn, because I find myself to be very much a learning manager. I am not an accomplished manager. I'm not by no means an expert manager. I'm still very much learning on how to manage other people. And I find that to be a tool that's extremely useful for me.